Today I am speaking with Meg Tysoe, and Meg has a piece in an upcoming anthology published by InScribe Press. The anthology is Creativity and Chaos, Artistic Endeavors for Trying Times. Meg, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Isn't Zoom a marvelous thing?
Yes, isn't it? It's amazing. Yeah, we can just meet across the country. You're in Ontario, I'm in BC, and here we are together.
I've lived most of my life sort of transatlantic, transcontinental. So before Zoom, there was just little old FaceTime, and before that, little old Skype. It's
Yes,
come a long way.
we have come a long way. So I'm noticing that your piece in the anthology is called Less Than a Carpenter, and it's in the creative nonfiction category, which I find interesting because I you could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but creative nonfiction, it's based in reality, but you write it as if it's in story form. Would that be a good way of
Well, that yes, I think that's a pretty good way of understanding it. I mean, everything really is creative nonfiction if we're talking about memoirs and that, because our memories aren't perfect, and you can't put a normal life anyway into something that's really interesting, because most of our lives, face it, are boring, and that's probably a good thing, because it's nice to go and watch movies about great heroes facing horrible odds, but most of us don't really care for that much, do we? At least I don't. Maybe I'm
Yeah,
biased.
I guess if it was all just about the mundane, we need a little excitement, a little action. Uh,
Well, that's why we like movies, isn't it? I mean, there's this old Chinese curse, right? May you live in interesting times. It's a curse, not a promise for anything great. But unfortunately, yes, some of us do go through interesting times, and certainly in the last few years, the whole world hasn't it? Yes. So I,
yeah.
I I didn't really think about it a lot, because I only heard about the anthology on the day that was the last day of submissions.
Wow.
Um, it
Good for
just
you for sliding in there. Yes. Wow.
in a sort of roundabout way, and I thought, oh, well, that sounds really interesting. Anything I know about is chaos, and the attempt to be creative in various ways during what's been a pretty chaotic life. And so I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I had, probably dozens of devotionals and stories that I could have tweaked pretty quickly, and submitted them. But it happened to be a sort of perfectly dreadful time in my life. And I'd been thinking a lot about the home I'd sold in France, where I'd spent many happy years, and because of this sort of perfect storm, I started writing about that from scratch. And before I knew it, it was midnight, and I thought, well, that was perhaps cathartic, but it's no good for the anthology. And then I realized that the cutoff was midnight, but it was midnight, I think, Pacific time, or at least Central time. So while
Yeah.
it was midnight for me, it wasn't midnight for the cutoff. And so I sort of sent it off. And then I got an acknowledgement from Nina, the editor, and then she said, well, we've extended the deadline. So
Yes.
would you send in something else? And I thought about it, but because, as I said, my life was at that moment rather dreadful, I just never did get around to sending. I thought it'd be lovely to send in a photo or two to go with
Yeah.
what I'd written, but as I say, I just never could pull it all together. So that was the only thing I sent
Well, so that it sounds like that was, some serendipity happening there because for sure, you know,
it was remarkable sort of timing. given. I just spent some time with friends who had spent many lovely holidays with me at my home in France. And they had just asked, so what's happened to it since you sold it? And so we looked it up on the web and seen that it was being offered as a holiday rental, which I had done. I had a couple of places over there, and it was one of those things where you put so much into the building of a home, a house, and then to see it in somebody else's hands, it's not fair, but it hurts,
Yeah.
mine.
Yeah,
and,
there's still that
and it makes you think about all these things that have happened in your life. And so I started thinking about why that mattered so much. And years ago, this is kind of going back a bit, but I had applied for a writer's residency in Tuscany, which was just down the road from where I was living at the time. It just sounded really interesting, but I didn't really have anything on the go. You had to submit a manuscript idea and writing samples to get accepted. And so I sort of started on this outline for a memoir about what had been going on. And I called it My Life as a House.
Oh.
And because though that was just a working title, the first thing to do was to look on Amazon and see what else is out there. And I discovered there was a film called Life as a House, which I hadn't read, with Kevin Kline and Kristen Scott Thomas. So of course I immediately watched it, and I thought, oh, that's my life. Because it was as though it was the perfect dégringolade, of what this fellow was going through and what I was, even though we were, continents apart and all of that. And so, of course, I had to change the title. But when that all came to me, when I saw this anthology and chaos and creativity, and I thought about that whole thing, the book I never wrote, and I started writing about it, how my life anyway, sort of defined by these places I've lived and what I've done to them, what they've done to me. So
I'm intrigued. I'm so intrigued. So have you actually written and published that memoir, or no?
Oh no. I've written most of it, but I really think if I do anything more with it, it would be as a novel.
Oh, okay.
Because, again, the sort of flip side of creative nonfiction would be it's nonfiction told creatively. I'm
Right.
not sure. There's a sort of I remember reading the disclaimer in somebody's memoir. I don't remember whose, I'm afraid, but I remember laughing because it said everything in this is true, although nothing of what I've described actually happened.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a sort of verisimilitude. What is truth? Truth is what it means to your soul, not in what actually happened in the moment. I don't know, but I couldn't say a lot of the things I'd like to say if they were actually perceived as having happened because of the other people involved, and that gets sticky, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that would give you more license to develop the story, and then your disclaimer is just if there's any similarity to real people.
That's right. You put in that ultimate disclaimer.
Yeah.
I was watching the movie the other night, Adrift. I don't know. It's a wonderful book. I'm a sailor by birth and genetics and all of that. And so I knew about that storm, the Hurricane Raymond, and this woman had written this book called Red Sky Morning. And so when the movie came out, I had to watch it. And I thought it begins with, this is a true story. And it is very, very close to the book with the things that they have to do to fit it into a movie. of course. But at the very end, at the end of the film, in the credits, it's a fiction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a work of
and
fiction.
no resemblance and all the other things. And I thought, well, that's really going a little bit too far, isn't it? Especially because the actual woman Cammy appears at the end of the movie herself sailing. So there's all sorts of lines, but I suppose in this day you have to be extremely careful about what you
Yes,
say.
yes, one has to be careful. So in terms of your piece that's in this anthology, I haven't read it yet myself. Um, so can you tell us a little, without spoilers, I guess, can you tell us a little bit more specifically what it's about?
Well, the place I'm in now, I came to the place where I had to sell up my home in France, and there were a lot of reasons. Some there in the piece, but I was basically homeless, living in bed and breakfasts and carting everything I owned in a suitcase and not knowing what to do and looking. And, when you have no particular reason to live anywhere, it's extremely difficult to find a place to live. My life was in France. And while I had friends here, I just didn't really know what to do. And I came out to the Niagara Peninsula, which is for Canada a very large wine growing region, vineyards everywhere, and that had this sort of ethos of France, the France I knew, the South. And I came across this house, and I had given up basically. I thought, I'm going to go away, I'm going to go back home to the Caribbean, actually, to where my parents lived on a sailboat for
Wow.
20 years. And just take some time out. And then this place came up for sale at midnight the night before.
That seems to be
I,
a theme. Midnight.
it does. And I went to see it, and it was February, and there was ice storms, and everything was about as drearily miserable, and not the Mediterranean where I'd lived, and not the Caribbean, but gray, gloomy, miserable, icy. And that I came around the corner and saw this place, and it was pretty dismal. But it was this little stone cottage in the middle of vineyards, and there were daffodils at the door. Daffodils, they had bloomed in some, I don't know, a spree of ecstasy, thinking that the sun had come out, and then this ice storm came, and they'd all been flattened, and they were lying battered and bruised. But they were daffodils, and they were, I don't know, it was a kind of sign of hope. It was madness, actually, really, madness. But by the 11 o'clock that night, I had been at the place, and I've spent the rest of my time in hard labor trying to transform it into something that's sort of Tuscan, Provençal, Caribbean, happy, a happy place where I hope would be a kind of writer's retreat and place where people can come and be safe and happy. That's what I did in France for so many years. And I said in the piece, I'd seen people who hardened business executives and blasé teenagers with rings in their noses and I don't give a poop about the world, just bursting into tears and being brought down by the beauty of the place. It was enchanting. It really was on the Mediterranean. This ancient stone, very simple house, and the power of place. So there we are. My life is a house.
Power of place. No, that's actually quite profound. And also what comes to mind as you're talking, I mean, the anthology itself is creativity and chaos, but it's almost like creativity from chaos, or I'm thinking beauty from ashes.
Yeah,
There's a
that's
lot
a
of
lovely way of
metaphors.
putting it. Yes, that what do we do when there is no chaos? Generally, we plod along.
You
And
become stagnant, perhaps, like it's trials that do tend to spur one on.
yeah, yes, they do. And I mean, necessity is the mother of not just invention, but all sorts of things. And so there, when I say less than a carpenter, because I never wanted to do or to be this sort of person who builds things and lays stone and that sort of thing. But that seems to be done basically from necessity. And people come and say, oh, it must be such a labor of love. And if I'm honest, I have to say, well, there is love, but there's also a lot of frustration and chaos, living with a sort of displaced toilet in your living room for 3 years because you're
Oh,
waiting on plumbers and
yeah.
somebody to come up with a permit to let you put another hole in your own floor, sort of thing. Bit
Oh,
different from France, where you just sort of feed the right person the right bribe and do anything. You wait for the real kind of legitimacy. You never get anywhere, which is probably why I was never successful.
but
And
I have to say another thought that's roaming around my mind as you speak is the idea of foundations, like you've mentioned stone and sort of laboring and stuff. And yet like we need that firm foundation. And I'm thinking like, I don't know, before I even started recording, you were mentioning that you had traveled around a lot and done mission work. And I mean, that's so foundational, I think, for other work that goes on, in terms of a spiritual application. We need that firm foundation. We need people like you who have rooted or, have their feet on the ground, even if you're not staying in one place. Let me put it that
I
way.
kind of love to stay in one place, except when I'm sailing. But the yes, I mean, in the end, nothing means anything if it's not done for eternity. If it's not done for the Lord Jesus Christ, it means nothing.
Yes.
Anybody can make a beautiful house. Anybody can renovate. Anybody can, and if you have enough money, you can get it done quickly and fairly painlessly. But if it's not done for eternity, then there's
Hmm.
no point whatsoever. And that's the the only thing. I mean, I tell myself every day when I wake up and say, do I really have to get out of bed? Do I really have to do more of this today? And say, who are you doing it for? I
Right.
mean, maybe some of my earthly desires will come true. What I want is to witness to people. What I want is to perhaps offer an alternative. I mean, I went to this writer's residency, as I mentioned, in Tuscany. It was fabulously beautiful.
I'm
It
so
was a
envious. Yeah.
12th century palazzo with a huge swimming pool. And I mean, it was a dream. And yet, to me, it was a massive disappointment because I was so completely at odds with everybody there because there wasn't a single person there who wasn't into the whole yoga, the vegan. I'm not saying against vegans, but what I
No,
mean
no.
is a sort of lifestyle attitude that goes together.
Yeah.
And I didn't fit in.
Hmm.
Being a Christian, I talked to a few people. There was one very, very lovely woman there with whom I had a great deal of good conversation because she'd sort of had it all and knew it wasn't enough.
Hmm.
But the point is that if you're just doing it because you want to make yourself famous, you want to build a career, even just humbly to be a writer, if it's not done with some transcendent purpose in mind, it's
Yeah.
absolutely useless. I mean, if you just think that this is it, and I realized I checked out your website when I got your email and saw we have certainly something in common and interest in creation and science, and
Yeah.
as a passion of mine, trained as a scientist. And
Wow.
it was Richard Dawkins, that sort of world's greatest mesotheist, as Jonathan Sarkozy calls him, that led me to Christ, realizing that his book that I had to study in university, The Selfish Gene, was such a long hogwash. That, in any case, that's a passion of mine. But if you basically believe, you're related to broccoli and Fisher in your grandparents' lineage, and you're just going to return to dust, and that's it. End story. Who cares about anything?
Yeah.
What point? But if you're doing something for eternity, you're doing something where you hope that you're doing it for God, you're doing it for the Lord you love, then even if you don't achieve what you're trying for, God knows that you tried. He knows your heart, and that's what you have to believe matters, because especially if you've been a spectacular failure as I have been for so long.
I think you're too hard on yourself.
But it's not. It's not just that. It's just that if there's no point, why do it? And when I said less than a carpenter, I meant that I really have been tremendously a carpenter, though I haven't wanted to be. But I'm not the carpenter.
No.
Who sorts our lives, who trims and planes and adjusts and straightens and levels and does all of those things that we need doing so that he can shape us into something that he's proud to present to his Father.
And that's a beautiful, I love that metaphor too, like you yourself as the carpenter, but then, basically pointing to Jesus, who's the ultimate carpenter
and
was as a trade. So that's
reminded that all the time. When you make mistakes, I have a friend who always says, when I'm disappointed with how something turns out, it's wood. It's wood. It can be shaped, but it's not some plastic thing that will be perfect to our eyes. And that perhaps is a kind of metaphor for our lives. It's not how we see ourselves, it's how God sees us.
right.
And that, I think, is what I was trying to say, that I think I've learned a little bit in all of these fairly difficult years of having to adjust to things that you, as Karen Blixen said in Out of Africa, it's not how I thought my life would be.
Right.
But
you're trusting, I mean, that like, again, it's that whole idea of, beauty from ashes or whatever, like that, but God knew what he was doing, and he's brought something beautiful and meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. And I was, when this anthology thing came up, and I saw it and thought, and wrote the piece. I was just about getting ready to release a book that I've been working on for a year, which really touches on this about, there's this we are stardust whole thing that permeates education and astronomy and all of that. You're only, as Lawrence Krauss, this physicist, so famously said, forget Jesus. You're here because a star died for you, or maybe he said a nebula. But this whole thing, I mean, it's not just bordering on blasphemy. It's
yeah.
And that has always stuck with me. So I wanted to write this book that say stardust is nothing, more than stardust, and infinitely more than worth that to the creator. And,
Who created the stardust?
Yeah, exactly. He created the stars, trillions upon trillions
Yeah.
upon trillions, and he gave each one of them a name.
Yeah.
And I love listening to it's a really great creation, strong. Um, he's a physicist, a mathematician. His name is Jason Lisle, Dr. Jason Lisle. But he said he used to believe that the number of stars was finite because God named everyone, so therefore there must be a finite number. But then he said, I've come to realize that God is infinite, so there's no problem with him being able to name an infinite number of stars. But the point is that yes, he's made maybe an infinite number, but certainly those trillions of stars, and he knows everyone by name, and they're just dust. They are just dust. You know, they're less complicated than the sort of fly you swatted. um, but the important thing is that he says he knows your name, my name. He knows the name of every child, and that is just so incredible. That
Yeah.
the Lord of the universe. I mean, one of the great things that these secular physicists and astronomers always say is the vastness of the universe is sort of proof that there is no creator. I mean, we're just so totally, completely insignificant. And there's that famous pale blue dot thing of Carl Sagan, and yet I think it proves exactly the
The
opposite.
opposite. Yeah.
God is just so magnificent,
Mm.
so immense in his
Mm.
creativity. And talk about creativity and chaos.
Yeah.
There we are. We have the God
Right.
who.
This has been fascinating. This has been so lovely and so intriguing. I could just talk to you all day, but I'm unfortunately, I think our time is up.
Oh my goodness, that flew by quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, it went very quickly, but it has been just wonderful to hear a little bit of your story, and I'm intrigued. Well, first of all, to read the piece in the anthology, the creativity and chaos anthology coming out, but to look up some other of your writing, because yeah, you've you've piqued my interest for sure.
Well, thank you. And
Yes.
it's great to meet you.
God
And
bless you. It's been lovely. Thank you so
more
much,
from
Meg.
you. Thank you.